My wife Jessica texted me to relax about finding her college ex-boyfriend at her solo retreat, but discovering months of secret planning on her tablet told me everything I needed to know. I had wholeheartedly supported her decision to take this art therapy retreat in Costa Rica, thinking it would help her process some childhood trauma she'd mentioned wanting to work through during our recent conversations about personal growth. She'd been researching wellness retreats for months, spending evenings scrolling through websites and reading reviews, finally settling on this remote eco-lodge called Alma Verde that specialized in healing through creative expression and connecting with pristine nature. I was genuinely proud of her for prioritizing her mental health and told her I'd handle everything at home while she took 2 weeks to focus entirely on herself. I arranged to work from home more frequently, planned to meal prep for myself, and even researched the time difference so I'd know when not to disturb her meditation sessions. The morning she left for the airport, I kissed her goodbye and reminded her that this time was about her healing journey, not about checking in with me constantly or worrying about household responsibilities. I wanted her to feel completely free to immerse herself in whatever therapeutic experiences the retreat offered without any guilt or distraction from home. 3 days into her retreat, I received a text message that stopped me cold while I was reviewing quarterly tax reports at my accounting firm downtown. The message read casually, almost dismissively, that she'd run into Derek, her college boyfriend from nearly a decade ago, at the same lodge and that I should be a good husband and not overthink this amazing coincidence. She added that the universe worked in mysterious ways and that I should relax and trust her healing process, as if my potential concern was somehow a character flaw I needed to overcome. The entire tone felt patronizing and manipulative, like she was preemptively managing my reaction to something she knew would naturally upset any reasonable husband. Jessica had never once mentioned Derek during our 3 years of marriage, and suddenly he was appearing at the same remote Costa Rican eco-lodge she'd spent months meticulously researching. I sat in my office calculating the astronomical odds of such a coincidence while her words echoed in my mind, particularly her condescending instruction for me to be a good husband and not overthink things. The phrase bothered me more each time I replayed it, sounding less like reassurance and more like a command designed to shut down any questions I might have about this convenient development. That evening, I couldn't concentrate on anything productive, replaying the message and trying to understand why every sentence felt carefully crafted to manipulate my response. Jessica had deliberately left her tablet at home since she claimed to want a complete digital detox during her retreat, and I'd been using it occasionally to access our shared streaming accounts and manage our household digital subscriptions. While searching for a documentary to help me fall asleep after hours of restless thoughts about her message, I noticed her email application was still logged in and displaying a notification from the retreat booking website. Curiosity mixed with growing suspicion got the better of me, and I opened what I assumed would be standard confirmation details, wellness schedules, or perhaps tips for maximizing the therapeutic experience. Instead, I discovered months of detailed correspondence between Jessica and Derek, starting 3 months before she'd even casually mentioned to me that she might be interested in taking some kind of wellness retreat. The email chain revealed elaborate coordination of their entire travel experience, from booking identical flights with seats strategically placed near each other to reserving adjacent rooms at the eco-lodge with connecting balconies overlooking the rainforest canopy. Derek had initially suggested the Costa Rica location after conducting research into places that would seem legitimately therapeutic and spiritually meaningful if anyone questioned Jessica's sudden newfound interest in wellness retreats and personal development. They discussed timing their individual bookings carefully so their reservations wouldn't appear obviously connected in any reservation system, and Jessica had even practiced different versions of her story about wanting to focus on art therapy, meditation, and personal growth through creative expression. Reading through their increasingly intimate messages, I watched my wife transform from the woman I thought I knew and trusted into someone calculating and deceptive, someone who'd spent months crafting an elaborate lie while I enthusiastically supported what I believed was her genuine healing journey. The most chilling aspect was how naturally and casually they discussed manipulating me throughout their planning process, with Derek suggesting she emphasized the therapeutic and spiritual aspects of the trip to make me feel guilty or selfish about questioning her need for this experience. Their final email exchange before her departure was Jessica expressing barely contained excitement about finally having uninterrupted time together while I remained home like an obedient husband, managing all household responsibilities and remaining completely unaware of their romantic reunion. The evidence was overwhelming and methodically documented, showing this wasn't some spontaneous emotional decision or unexpected encounter, but rather a carefully orchestrated deception that had been months in the making with my unwitting financial and emotional support. Rather than confronting Jessica immediately with what I'd discovered, I decided to take her condescending advice literally and truly relax by reconnecting with people who actually valued honest communication. My widowed neighbor Claire had been struggling with her own family drama since her husband's passing 6 months earlier, dealing with manipulative relatives who'd been pressuring her to make financial decisions while she was still grieving. We'd exchanged pleasantries over the fence for years, but I'd never really gotten to know her beyond friendly waves and occasional package deliveries when she wasn't home from her job at the downtown public library. Claire had mentioned feeling isolated since her husband's death, partly because his family had become increasingly demanding about his estate while offering little emotional support during her difficult transition to single life. I found myself genuinely interested in her perspective on dealing with people who claim to care while actually pursuing their own agendas, and she seemed to appreciate having someone listen without trying to fix everything or offer unsolicited advice about moving forward too quickly. We started talking more frequently during our evening walks around the neighborhood, conversations that felt refreshingly straightforward after months of Jessica's increasingly evasive behavior that I now understood had been covering her secret planning. When Claire mentioned wanting to learn cooking techniques her late husband had always handled, I offered to show her some basic meal preparation skills I developed during my bachelor years before marriage. We decided to take a beginner's cooking class together at the community center, something neither of us would have considered doing with a partner but felt comfortable exploring as friends supporting each other through challenging times. The instructor taught us how to prepare simple but elegant dishes, and Claire's genuine enthusiasm for learning something new reminded me what it felt like to spend time with someone who wasn't constantly calculating hidden angles or managing multiple versions of the truth. After our second cooking class, I posted a casual photo on social media showing Claire and me laughing while attempting to fold dumplings, with a caption about discovering that cooking with friends makes everything taste better. The image captured a moment of genuine happiness that I hadn't experienced in months, both of us covered in flour and clearly enjoying each other's company without any underlying tension or unspoken agendas. I'd completely forgotten about Jessica's social media monitoring habits until my phone started ringing 30 minutes after the post went live, displaying her number calling from Costa Rica at what had to be an inconvenient time given the time zone difference. Jessica's voice was strained and demanding as she questioned why I was spending time with another woman while she was away focusing on her healing journey, completely ignoring the irony of her position given what I now knew about Derek's presence at her retreat. I calmly explained that Claire was a neighbor going through a difficult time and that we were simply learning cooking skills together, the same way I might help any friend who needed support during a challenging period. Jessica's response was immediate and hypocritical, insisting that cooking classes with another woman looked inappropriate and that I should be more sensitive to how my actions might appear to others, especially while she was vulnerable and far from home. The conversation became increasingly surreal as Jessica demanded detailed explanations of my friendship with Claire while simultaneously defending her own situation with Derek as completely innocent and coincidental. She claimed that anyone with emotional intelligence would understand the difference between her unexpected encounter with an old friend and my deliberate choice to spend time with an attractive neighbor, as if the months of secret planning I'd discovered had never happened. I listened to her elaborate justifications and accusations with growing amazement at her ability to maintain such complete cognitive dissonance, defending behavior in herself that she found unacceptable in me. When I pointed out the obvious double standard in her logic, Jessica's tone shifted to desperate manipulation, suggesting that my friendship with Claire proved I'd never really supported her healing journey and had been looking for excuses to connect with other women all along. She demanded that I immediately stop spending time with Claire and delete the social media post, claiming that my actions were sabotaging her therapeutic progress and making it impossible for her to focus on the important inner work she was doing in Costa Rica. The conversation ended with Jessica hanging up abruptly when I calmly refused to defend myself against accusations that she had no moral authority to make, given the evidence I'd found but hadn't yet mentioned. Over the following days, Jessica's messages became increasingly erratic as she attempted to simultaneously minimize her situation with Derek while demanding detailed accounts of every interaction I had with Claire. She would text at random hours claiming she was just checking in from her meditation sessions, then immediately pivot to interrogating me about whether Claire had been to our house or if we'd made plans beyond the cooking classes. The desperation in her messages was becoming obvious, especially when she started suggesting that Derek was actually helping her process old relationship trauma and that his presence was therapeutically beneficial for her healing journey. Meanwhile, I quietly scheduled a consultation with Patricia Wells, a highly recommended divorce attorney whose office was conveniently located near my accounting firm downtown. Patricia was a no-nonsense professional in her 50s who'd built her reputation handling complex marital dissolution cases, and she listened to my situation with the detached expertise of someone who'd seen every variation of infidelity and deception. I brought printed copies of Jessica's email correspondence with Derek, along with our joint financial records showing the retreat expenses and related charges that I now knew were funding their romantic reunion rather than any legitimate therapeutic program. Patricia reviewed the evidence methodically, taking notes about the timeline of Jessica's deception and the financial implications of her choices, then explained that the premeditation and financial dishonesty would likely work in my favor during divorce proceedings. She recommended that I continue documenting any further communications while avoiding confrontation that might prompt Jessica to become more careful about covering her tracks or potentially destroying evidence. The legal consultation gave me a sense of control and direction that I hadn't felt since discovering the truth, replacing my initial shock and hurt with a calm determination to protect my interests and future. Claire, meanwhile, was dealing with her own revelation about manipulative family members when she discovered that her brother-in-law had been systematically stealing from her late husband's estate while pressuring her to sign documents she didn't fully understand. Her situation paralleled mine in disturbing ways, both of us realizing we'd been trusting people who were actively working against our best interests while maintaining facades of love and concern. Inspired by my measured approach to handling Jessica's deception, Claire decided to cut ties with family members who'd been exploiting her grief and vulnerability for their own financial gain. We found ourselves having increasingly honest conversations about the psychology of manipulation and the difference between people who support you during difficult times versus those who create difficulties to maintain control. Claire's insights as a librarian gave her a unique perspective on human behavior, having observed countless people researching everything from legal procedures to relationship advice. And she helped me understand that Jessica's pattern of behavior wasn't unusual among people who felt entitled to deceive their partners. The contrast between Claire's straightforward communication style and Jessica's elaborate manipulations became more apparent each day, making me appreciate what healthy interaction actually looked like. Jessica's attempts to control the narrative from Costa Rica became increasingly desperate and contradictory as she realized I wasn't responding to her usual manipulation tactics the way I had in the past. She alternated between claiming that her connection with Derek was purely spiritual and suggesting that I was paranoid for questioning the coincidence, sometimes within the same conversation. Her messages revealed someone who was losing confidence in her ability to manage multiple versions of the truth simultaneously, especially when she started asking leading questions about whether I'd been acting differently or if anyone had said anything about her trip that seemed suspicious. During my second meeting with Patricia Wells, I learned more about protecting my financial interests while Jessica remained out of the country, unaware that her deception had been fully uncovered. Patricia explained that Jessica's use of our joint credit cards for expensive purchases meant to impress Derek could be documented as financial infidelity, especially since she'd been buying designer clothes and spa treatments that had nothing to do with the therapeutic retreat she'd supposedly booked. The credit card statements told their own story, showing charges at luxury boutiques and romantic restaurants that weren't part of any legitimate wellness program offered by the Ecolodge. I spent an evening organizing all the evidence methodically, creating detailed folders with printed emails, financial records, and screenshots of Jessica's contradictory text messages that revealed her growing panic about maintaining her story. Patricia had recommended documenting everything chronologically to establish a clear pattern of premeditation and deception, and the timeline showed months of careful planning followed by increasingly desperate attempts to control my reactions from thousands of miles away. The evidence painted a picture of someone who'd invested enormous effort into orchestrating this affair while simultaneously demanding loyalty and trust from me. Claire provided emotional support during this process while dealing with her own legal situation regarding her brother-in-law's theft from her late husband's estate. Her attorney had discovered forged signatures on documents and unauthorized transactions that had been occurring since shortly after her husband's funeral, revealing a level of calculation and opportunism that matched what I was experiencing with Jessica. We found ourselves comparing notes about the psychology of people who exploit trust during vulnerable moments, whether that was grief in Claire's case or my commitment to supporting Jessica's supposed healing journey. The parallel nature of our situations created a unique bond between us, both of us learning to recognize manipulation tactics that we'd previously attributed to stress or emotional difficulty rather than deliberate deception. Claire's analytical mind, trained through years of helping library patrons research complex topics, helped me understand that Jessica's behavior followed predictable patterns common among people who maintain secret relationships while demanding transparency from their partners. Her insights gave me confidence that my measured response was appropriate rather than cold or uncaring, as Jessica had been suggesting in her increasingly frantic messages. Jessica's threats to return early from Costa Rica became more frequent as she sensed her control slipping, but I knew from Patricia's advice that her premature return would actually work in my favor by demonstrating her prioritization of managing me over completing her supposed therapeutic program. The irony wasn't lost on me that her attempts to manipulate the situation were providing additional evidence of her deceptive nature and lack of genuine commitment to the healing journey she'd claimed was so essential for her personal growth. Meanwhile, I was experiencing actual emotional growth through my friendship with Claire and my methodical approach to handling this crisis with professional legal guidance. The financial records Patricia helped me organize revealed that Jessica had been spending approximately 3 times her usual amount during the Costa Rica trip, with charges for couples activities, romantic dinners, and luxury experiences that contradicted everything she'd told me about seeking solitude and therapeutic introspection. Each credit card statement reinforced the reality that I'd been funding not just Jessica's transportation and accommodation for this affair, but also her efforts to impress Derek with an expensive lifestyle that she couldn't afford on her own income from her part-time marketing consulting work. Jessica returned home 3 days earlier than scheduled, walking into our kitchen to find divorce papers and printed evidence of her elaborate affair planning spread methodically across our dining table like a comprehensive audit of her deception. I'd arranged the documents chronologically, from her initial emails with Derek 3 months ago through the credit card statements showing romantic dinners and couple spa treatments that had nothing to do with art therapy or personal healing. Her face went through a series of expressions as she processed what she was seeing, starting with confusion, shifting to panic, and finally settling on the calculated look of someone preparing to launch a damage control campaign. She immediately attempted to reframe the entire situation, claiming that her early return proved she'd chosen our marriage over whatever had been happening with Derek, as if cutting short an affair demonstrated loyalty rather than damage control. Jessica insisted that the Costa Rica trip had actually provided her with clarity about what she truly wanted, conveniently omitting any mention of the months of secret planning that had made the trip possible in the first place. Her explanation painted Derek as someone who'd pursued her despite her commitment to our marriage, completely reversing the reality documented in her own emails where she'd been equally enthusiastic about coordinating their romantic reunion. When confronted with her own written words expressing excitement about having uninterrupted time with Derek while I remained home managing household responsibilities like a good husband, Jessica claimed that those messages had been taken out of context and represented temporary confusion rather than genuine intent. She suggested that I was overreacting to what had essentially been an expensive therapy session that happened to involve someone from her past, as if months of premeditation could be dismissed as spontaneous emotional processing. The gaslighting was so comprehensive that I almost admired the audacity, watching her attempt to rewrite documented history while standing in front of overwhelming evidence of her calculated deception. Jessica's next strategy involved accusing me of planning my friendship with Claire as some form of premeditated revenge, suggesting that my social media posts were designed to hurt her while she was vulnerable and far from home. She claimed that any reasonable husband would have waited to discuss concerns about her trip rather than immediately seeking comfort from an attractive neighbor, completely ignoring the timeline that showed my friendship with Claire had developed after discovering her affair planning. Her logic required believing that I'd somehow known about Derek's presence before she'd even told me about the coincidental encounter, making my previous support of her retreat into evidence of manipulative planning rather than genuine care. The conversation became increasingly surreal as Jessica demanded to know how long I'd been suspicious and whether I'd been monitoring her communications before she left, unwilling to accept that her own carelessness with her tablet had revealed everything. She alternated between claiming that nothing significant had happened with Derek and insisting that her connection with him had been essential for processing unresolved feelings that were affecting our marriage, as if emotional adultery was actually a form of relationship maintenance. When I presented the financial records showing her expensive purchases meant to impress Derek, she argued that she deserved to feel pampered and attractive after months of feeling unappreciated in our marriage, somehow making her affair spending into evidence of my inadequacy as a husband. Jessica's final desperate manipulation involved threatening to contest the divorce proceedings and claim that I'd been emotionally abusive by monitoring her private communications and forming a relationship with Claire while she was away seeking therapeutic help. She painted herself as a victim of my controlling behavior and paranoia, someone who'd been driven to seek comfort elsewhere because of my failure to provide the emotional support she needed. The complete reversal of reality was stunning to witness, watching her transform documented deception into evidence of my wrongdoing while maintaining the moral authority to judge my transparent friendship with a grieving neighbor. When I remained calm and unshaken by her accusations, simply pointing out that the evidence spoke for itself and that Patricia Wells was prepared to present everything chronologically to demonstrate premeditation versus reactive behavior, Jessica realized that her usual manipulation tactics weren't working. Her final attempt involved breaking down in tears and claiming that she'd made a terrible mistake but that our marriage was worth fighting for, conveniently forgetting that she'd been fighting to maintain her affair rather than save our relationship until the moment she discovered her deception had been uncovered. The performance felt hollow after seeing who she really was when she thought I remained ignorant of her true intentions and activities. The divorce proceedings moved with surprising efficiency once Jessica's attorney reviewed the overwhelming documentary evidence Patricia Wells had organized, including the months of premeditated planning, financial deception, and Jessica's own written admissions of manipulating me throughout the process. Jessica's lawyer quickly advised her that contesting the divorce would likely result in a more unfavorable settlement given the clear evidence of adultery and financial impropriety, especially since her affair had been funded through our joint accounts without my knowledge or consent. Within 6 weeks, we'd reached a settlement that protected my financial interests while allowing Jessica to maintain some dignity by avoiding a prolonged court battle that would have made her deception even more public. Jessica's decision to move in with Derek immediately after our separation inadvertently simplified the legal process by demonstrating her lack of commitment to reconciliation or genuine remorse about the affair. Her quick transition from claiming the Costa Rica incident was meaningless to establishing a household with Derek revealed the true nature of her priorities and made it impossible for her to argue that she'd been confused or temporarily overwhelmed by emotions. Patricia noted that Jessica's behavior pattern was actually quite common among people who orchestrate affairs while maintaining marriages for financial security, then quickly abandon the pretense once their deception is discovered. During this period, Claire and I found our friendship naturally deepening as we both navigated the complex emotions of rebuilding our lives after discovering that people we trusted had been systematically deceiving us. Her legal battle against her brother-in-law was progressing successfully, with her attorney recovering most of the stolen inheritance and exposing forged documents that could have cost her tens of thousands of dollars if she'd continued trusting family members who claimed to have her best interests at heart. Our shared experience of dealing with manipulative people who exploited our trust created a foundation of understanding that felt more solid than anything I'd experienced with Jessica. Claire's approach to processing her husband's death and her family's betrayal showed a resilience and emotional intelligence that impressed me, especially her ability to grieve genuinely while also taking practical steps to protect herself from further exploitation. She never tried to rush her healing process or pretend that discovering her in-laws' theft hadn't been devastating, but she also refused to let their manipulation define her future or make her cynical about trusting others. Her balance between vulnerability and strength reminded me what healthy emotional processing actually looked like, contrasting sharply with Jessica's performative approach to personal growth that had been designed to facilitate her affair rather than address any real issues. The contrast between my developing relationship with Claire and what I'd experienced with Jessica became more apparent each day, particularly in how we communicated about difficult topics and supported each other through legal and emotional challenges. Claire never demanded that I process my divorce in any particular timeline or criticized my methodical approach to handling the situation, understanding that everyone deals with betrayal differently and that my calm response was a strength rather than emotional numbness. She also appreciated my analytical mind and attention to detail, qualities that Jessica had increasingly treated as boring or obsessive when they interfered with her ability to maintain her deception. As our friendship evolved into something deeper, Claire and I discovered that our shared experience of recognizing and responding to manipulation had taught us both to value honesty and direct communication in ways we'd perhaps taken for granted before. Neither of us was interested in games or hidden agendas after dealing with people who'd made deception into an art form, and our conversations felt refreshingly straightforward even when discussing complicated emotions about our respective situations. The foundation we were building felt genuine and sustainable because it was based on mutual respect and transparency rather than the fantasy projections and unspoken expectations that had characterized my marriage to Jessica. Watching Jessica struggle to adjust to life with Derek, who apparently had his own financial and commitment issues that became apparent once their Costa Rica fantasy ended, provided an unexpected lesson in how affairs rarely translate into successful long-term relationships when they're built on deception and escapism rather than genuine compatibility. 6 months later, I signed my final divorce papers in Patricia Wells' office while Claire successfully recovered the last of her stolen inheritance through legal action that resulted in criminal charges against her brother-in-law for fraud and forgery. We celebrated our respective victories over manipulation and deception with a quiet dinner at the same restaurant where Jessica had once demanded I take her for special occasions, though Claire and I chose it simply because the food was excellent and the atmosphere conducive to meaningful conversation rather than performative dining. The irony wasn't lost on either of us that we were finally free to enjoy experiences without hidden agendas or unspoken expectations complicating every interaction. Claire had transformed from a grieving widow being exploited by family members into a confident woman who'd learned to protect her interests while remaining open to genuine relationships, and watching her growth had been inspiring throughout my own divorce process. Her success in recovering her inheritance and holding her manipulative relatives accountable had given her a sense of empowerment that complemented my own journey from confused husband to someone who understood the difference between love and manipulation. We'd both learned that setting boundaries and expecting honesty weren't unreasonable demands but basic requirements for healthy relationships. The mutual friends who'd known Jessica and me as a couple were initially surprised by how quickly I'd moved forward, but those who understood the full scope of her deception supported my decision to build something genuine with Claire rather than waste time mourning a relationship that had been built on lies. Claire's friends from the library and her late husband's genuine circle appreciated seeing her find happiness again with someone who valued her intelligence and independence rather than trying to exploit her vulnerability or financial resources for personal gain. Our relationship developed naturally because we'd both learned to recognize red flags and appreciate green ones, understanding that healthy partnerships require mutual respect, transparency, and shared values rather than just physical attraction or convenient timing. Claire never tried to compete with Jessica's memory or demanded that I prove my commitment through expensive gestures, appreciating instead the thoughtful ways I showed care through consistent support and honest communication. Similarly, I valued Claire's direct approach to discussing concerns and her ability to maintain her own interests and friendships while building our relationship together. The contrast with my previous marriage became most apparent in how we handled disagreements and stress, approaching conflicts as problems to solve together rather than opportunities to manipulate or control each other's behavior. When Claire felt overwhelmed by legal proceedings against her brother-in-law, she asked for specific support rather than creating drama to test my commitment, and when I struggled with residual anger about Jessica's deception, Claire listened without trying to fix my feelings or rush my processing timeline. We'd both learned that genuine partnership meant supporting each other's growth rather than demanding that difficult emotions be hidden or resolved according to arbitrary schedules. Jessica's command to relax about her infidelity had inadvertently become the best advice I'd ever received, though not in the way she'd intended when she was trying to manage my reaction to her affair. Learning to relax my grip on a toxic relationship that was built on deception and manipulation had allowed me to recognize and embrace authentic happiness with someone who shared my values about honesty and commitment. The irony that Jessica's attempt to control my response to her betrayal had ultimately freed me to find genuine love wasn't lost on me, especially since her own affair had apparently deteriorated into the kind of relationship drama and financial instability that characterized people who choose partners based on excitement rather than compatibility. Claire and I often reflected on how our former partners' betrayals had ultimately led us to find each other and learn what we actually needed from relationships rather than what we thought we were supposed to want. Our story ended not with revenge or bitterness, but with the quiet satisfaction of two people who'd learned to value honesty and direct communication over the exhausting games that our former partners had preferred, building something sustainable together based on mutual respect rather than manipulation or fantasy.